So then, your syllabus, I assigned beauty, which I happen to think is, all these poems are from the same book. It's called The Art of the Lathe. That's my favorite poem. Most people's, I think, favorite poem from the book. It's also the longest. It's the poem that starts the book. So you could very easily argue that he puts that poem at the front of the book for a reason. Like, it kind of sets the tone, strangely, for all the poems I've already had you read. Body and Soul, Little Boy, Old Men Playing Basketball. All of those, you kind of get the sense, I think, by now, are part of the same sort of world, right? The same kind of people, the same part of America, like, you know, the same kind of time. Beauty is longer, but I think it also, as a result of that, is more encompassing. Gives you a much better sense of when and where we are, right? And what these people value, and what they think, what they maybe worry about, what they can't say, you know? And just maybe even, I would argue, and I say it like this because we probably won't have time to talk about beauty today, although maybe we will, since I can't do everything I want. But I think a lot of that poem is about what they can't allow themselves to think about. And it's not just beauty, but it's whatever that is tied into. Like, they cannot allow themselves to consider certain things. Much like in Body and Soul, they can't forgive Mickey Mantle. He's the bringer of truth and won't be easily forgiven, because he shows them something I think they already know, but they purposefully don't consider those things, right? They push those out of their mind. I think beauty is doing something similar. Anyway, what I wanted to do, what I had hoped to do, I didn't think it was asking too much. I pulled a student example that fortunately I printed out for me, because we would be in some trouble without it. It was an explication, and it's only a page long. I say all this because I'm still holding out a glimmer of hope that this guy will figure itself out and I'll be able to use it. But the reason I pulled the explication that I did, I will one day share it with you when I get to a computer that works. It's pretty standard as far as like decent first shots. And I say this because those of you who turned in the homework for last time, if you do it well, you do it how this student did, which is to say there's still room to improve, okay? Now the doing it well part is they picked some quotations. Some were better than others, but you got to pick quotations first. That you're not going to be able to write this paper without that. And they seem to have some ideas about the poem they chose, which was Body and Soul, okay? And that's good. Where they kind of fell down was, and again, this is not at all atypical, they have general ideas about the poem, and they give me those, but they don't ever really use the quotations to think about that stuff in more detail to better prove their argument. So what I want to do with the first bit of class here is do that. We have got to be able to do that if we're going to do this paper, okay? Now, what does that look like? Well, again, what I was going to have you guys do, I was going to have you look at the explication, and you can see it here, but I know some of you have great eyes, probably not that great, okay? They have 3 or 4 quotations in here. Some of them are decent, some of them are placeholders. For instance, one of the quotations, I was going to have you guys look through these and we were going to talk about why they're good, why they're not. We can't do that now. But I'll go ahead and tell you, one that I know you guys would pick would be this. This is from Body and Soul, okay? These were men who, quote, worked together in zinc mines or on oil rigs. They pull that line, right? Now, just using your memory, and we talked about this last time, so why would you pull that line, do you think? How would you use it? What would you try to say about it if you were going to have it in one of your papers? These are men who worked in zinc mines and on oil rigs. What do you think?
Maybe expand more on how difficult the job is?
How so? We always got to answer why and how, so I'm always going to push you. What's up?
Right.
What about these jobs?
To the actual physical labor of it?
Okay. All of that's true. Now, my rebuttal is, first of all, we probably do need to talk about that if we're going to talk about that poem. Absolutely. Because we're talking about the kind of guys these are. We have a blue collar we got to last time, things like this. You can just say that, though. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to quote zinc mines, oil rigs. You can just tell me. These are miners. They work on oil rigs. Because again, when I say we quote for language, what we do not quote for 99% of the time is facts. You can tell me that stuff. You just tell me. I read the poem too. If you gesture toward that, I know what you're talking about. Move on. Get to language, okay? And the problem with, on the surface anyway, zinc mines and oil rigs is it kind of just says exactly what it means. There's nothing to dig into, okay? However, they do start with a pretty solid quotation, which I'm going to have to write for you now, so give me a second. But oh, it died on me. I got cocky. Let's see. This one? Okay. From Coffee Mug, yes? Yes. Line 1 and 2, yes. Okay. Now I've already told you I think this quotation is better in the way that I'm trying to have you think about quotable material. The question for you then is, why? I keep saying we quote for language. Is there any language in these two lines that we could dig more into, you think? I just want to take some shots. What's up?
Fall in love with.
Fall in love with their own stories, that whole kind of last line. Okay, why, do you have a reason for saying so?
Maybe they're thinking, like maybe they're fantasizing over it. They're like looking past some of the more negative parts because.
What leads you to think that? Specifically.
Hmm?
What language leads you to that idea?
Fall in love part.
Good.
Usually, like I don't know, when you're like overlook some.
You only see the good stuff. Yeah. Well, especially to love something is one thing, to be in love is one thing, but to fall in love, like the trajectory of that phrase, right? Whether or not you've done that in your life yet, you know, we all do at different points. It's a very finite amount of time, you know? And yeah, we have the phrase, you're head over heels for someone or something, right? Like you're out of your mind. You're not rational. You're not honest. Right? For sure. For sure. We get all of that with this phrase. Okay? So when it comes time, if we want to talk about it, and if we're going to quote it, we probably should, we can highlight that, you know. And this is the part where I would be typing this up here and we'd make a paragraph together, but I'm going to roundhouse kick this thing. Anyway, you know, something to the effect of, by stating that these fathers are falling in love with their stories. You know, the speaker points out a lack of rational thinking, right? They're not doing that. I already said, like, they're also not being honest, okay? Why does that matter, do you think? And we may not have an answer right now, but I'm gonna go ahead and ask. Because this is the second line of the poem, and he's told us they fall in love with their own stories. They're not honest about it.
Later in the poem, it speaks of there's difference between truth and facts.
Talks a lot about that.
Right. Are we referring back to that right there?
Well, one thing I was going to get to, but we can jump ahead a little bit. Okay. No, you're good. You're good. Especially this word, stories, in. Okay, I'm gonna put a time for 1 second. But yes. Okay, but real quick, because I want to breadcrumb you guys. He talks about facts and truth in body and soul several times, but he also, at several points, and again, this is where I would have the poem up and show you. At I think 2 different points, he talks about he talks about how they know the facts. Oh wait, it's right after this, isn't it? Hang on. I'll give you the line now. Nuzzling the facts but mauling the truth, right? Like he kind of aligns the fathers with the bullet points of it. You know, Mickey Mantle showed up, hit 5 home runs, switch hit 1 time, like all that. Like they know that stuff. They're not incorrect with the facts, but they miss the truth. So he's kind of suggesting, I think, that dishonesty, that lack of rationality, that lack of accuracy, we're already starting that conversation about facts and truth, right? So when they tell their own stories, they're giving us those facts, I suppose, but they miss the truth. What's interesting, though, again, according to the speaker, it's because of this. It's not malicious. It's probably not even intentional. I don't know who among us could intentionally fall in love, right? But something comes over these guys when they tell their own stories. That I suppose maybe disables their ability to be accurate, right? So I would continue this thought and say there's a disability here for these guys to tell that story accurately. They can't give us the truth in the way that the speaker thinks of it. And again, I've taken you guys this far. My question would be, why do you think that is? Why can't these guys be honest? And you started to give us an answer before. I don't know if you remember. Damn.
What was it?
Why can't these guys be honest? Like, I took you guys so far, but I can't take you all the way to the water here. They're not rational. They're not honest. And we're used to thinking those modes as intentional. But this phrase, I would argue, right? We're talking about language. If I'm talking in a paper, you fall in love. That's not intentional. That's an accident. It's something. It's out of your control, right? You fall in love. It's kind of done to you almost. You have no control over it. They cannot control the fact that they are not completely accurate or honest here.
They don't want to talk about the bad sides. So they
Why?
might be hiding certain facts. Well, before we
Certain truths. We got to be careful with that in this poem, right? Because
So we talked about like their masculinity could be endangered, quote unquote.
okay.
And so if they got beat by a kid, they may tell the story of how well they played during the game, but they
Yeah.
may not mention the kid.
Well, I mean, they do. No, but they tell us the kid. They talk about getting beat. They give us the facts. Because facts are irrefutable, right? By definition. But what they don't give us, according to the speaker, and look, this would be, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but like, if we had a place here for next paragraph or down the line in the paper, it would be why they didn't walk him. It would be the truth, according to the speaker. You see what I'm saying? and I'm talking to you, so I'm gonna make sure everybody's with us. Like, if we are beginning to claim, and I think we are, based off of this and this, that they cannot tell the capital T truth in the way that the speaker talks about. And I think it does have something to do with not being willing or maybe able to be super open about all the stuff we've talked about the past couple classes. Their lives are hard, maybe not as rewarding, maybe they feel like they were lied to, any of that stuff. They can't consciously admit that, which I think is understandable. We can talk about that here. But that also begs the question, well then what are they not saying? That would be the next paragraph. They didn't walk him because, and you take your pick, right? My personal favorite would be because it cost them too much in their eyes of their father and everyone else, right? The idea of being a man cost them too goddamn much. That's the next paragraph. All right, so what we got here is they're unable to admit, maybe, the truth about their lives, right? Yeah. And you know what's really interesting about that? Because I've done this a lot. We started here and here, and that gave us, and by the way, these take multiple sentences to talk about. We just don't have the room because my computer's revolting. But also, the phrase all on its own, to suppose these fathers fall in love with their own stories, you could argue, also implies, what does it mean to fall in love with a story? Like a story is a kind of fiction. Yeah? If you fall in love with stories, doesn't that also, you could argue, imply you're not really considering what's really going on? You're not completely based in reality. You bring that whole phrase back around and talk about it here, if you wanted, to further prove the point that we are making. Do you see what I mean? Now, this is an honest question. I want an honest answer, if you can do that for me. Does anybody not understand what we're doing right now? This is vitally important. Okay. I don't believe all of you. I'm just telling you right now, like what we just did, that is what I'm asking you to do in a paper, okay? If you're gonna make an argument, you're gonna do it this way. You gotta dig into language, you gotta dig into details. You may have some ideas. This guy has some ideas about the poem that I think kind of revolve around this stuff. But now we're much more detailed, right? We're much more specific because we dug into the language. You'll notice too, we didn't even talk about that first line. We didn't even touch it. There's two options at that point. And you really wouldn't know until you wrote all this stuff, right? But the first option would be, well, is there anything more I could say about this kind of line of thought with that first line? Maybe. But if not, option two is, we just get rid of it. Turns out we didn't want that. We just wanted this one. We had enough, okay? That's part of it. Very quickly, because I want to move on from this. Let's consider the first line. We have it up there after all. Half numb, guzzling bourbon and Coke from coffee mugs. Is there anything in that first line you think we could maybe dig into in the same? It doesn't have to be this same argument either. I'm just curious. Is there anything you guys see up here where you maybe pull?
Half numb.
Half numb. Why that?
Good. To me, it could have like two different meanings.
Yeah.
Because after working a hard job, like you get off at the end of the day, and you're just done.
Kind of wiped out.
Like you're
Yeah.
wiped, and so like your feelings are kind of not really there, and then you're sore almost.
So one thing we're describing, you said this. Right? Because we're just, and I'm interrupting you, I'm sorry, but we're used to thinking of numbness as a physical thing, right? Like if you go to the doctor or the dentist, I'm numb. Well, that's good because I'm about to do something, right? Like, but also there's an implication of emotional numbness. And given what we know about the rest of the poem, that could be important. I cut you off, I'm sorry.
And then I was gonna say the second one could just
Yeah.
be straight up how it's being talked about, like if they're guzzling bourbon,
Guzzling bourbon, that is a hell of a verb, by the way.
they're obviously feeling some type of way.
There's all kinds of there's all kinds of verbs that could work, but if you guzzle bourbon, you are numb. You are absolutely numb. That's a thing to do. Wow. Yeah. And well, you could talk about that too, like the way I would have written it on the board, typing it. Despite the obvious first read, you can do this sometimes, right? You can kind of, it's almost like shaking hands with the reader and saying, look, we both understand one way this can be understood, which is these guys are a little bit drunk. They are guzzling bourbon. That's what happens when you do that. Okay? Despite that, the more interesting implication is how this numbness can be applied to these guys emotionally, right? Like, well, I'll ask you, the room, if we run with this implication that they are numb emotionally here. Again, the question always is, why does the speaker tell us that, do you think? Why offer us that information?
Is he trying to show that they're trying to escape reality?
Maybe. So what you're arguing, and again, this is an argument, you have to prove it, okay, is from the first two lines of the poem, these guys, or for their first line, because it's hyphenated, are intentionally escaping reality, right?
Yeah.
For sure. And look, that's actually super available anyway because we have that narrative, right? Well, why does this guy drink so much? Well, because he's, yeah, for sure. What I would say is you wouldn't want to just do that, right? But what's great, we already did all this work about the second line. So, and I have to stop myself sometimes. I get like weirdly excited. And I know it's stupid, so I'm pausing. But everything we just talked about here, which you can't see because of the goddamn computer, talks about it in a way that they can't help. They can't help but do this. They fall in love with their stories. And that's part, maybe, but another part of the conversation is they help it along. There's some intent here. They want to forget. They want to escape, get off work, right? We have that narrative for a reason. Like, it's a cliche for a reason. Yeah, for sure. So it's not just muted feelings. It's not just numbness. It's intentional now. They're getting drunk on purpose. Which, of the two ways to do it, is probably the better way. That invites another question. Because I think we could talk about all of this in a paragraph. Notice too, by the way, this is one quotation. If you pull a bomb-ass quotation, you at most need two for a paragraph. You don't have to drown me in evidence. But unintentional, can't help it. Intentional, mean to. How do we reconcile those two with each other? You know what I mean? Like, an easier way to put that question would be, why are they drinking after work? That's how you put it. And I think we all went, yeah, they're doing that. Why are they doing that? Do you think?
Because they hate their lives.
Something
I was gonna say because they're probably with their friends after work, and why not grab a couple beers with the boys?
Well, it's a communal thing, and I get these poems mixed up sometimes. Body and Soul talks about long beers after work too, right? Yeah. So that's kind of wrapped up in it too. Is but also that, yeah. Well, so then the slightly bigger question is, why does everyone get together and drink after work? How do they all know to do that?
It might be talked about at work. Like,
Sure.
hey, what are we doing after work? Well,
Yeah.
obviously
Why is it obvious?
Like, are you saying by the poem?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking, but go for it.
Well, you said how is it obvious?
Yes,
I was
yes.
saying like by the poem book, is it obvious?
Okay.
Or, like in a real world situation, is it?
Give me
obvious?
both. We'll try on both.
So like the poem, they talk about how they are actually drinking at that moment.
Yes.
But in a real world situation, usually like those hard working jobs, towards the end of the day, everyone's talking. Like everyone's figuring out what's going on. They're all
Yeah.
actually like getting to know each other at work.
Yeah.
And so what it could be is at the end of the day, they're just like, hey, what are y'all doing after work? Oh, we're going to the bar. Like, you mind if I tag along?
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I'm wondering, and we are, I wanted to be sure I understood your question because you're kind of calling me on my own bullshit, which I appreciate. We're teetering on the edge of, we might be stepping outside the poem, so we have to be careful. But I think it might be fair to posit, that's a super fancy verb for guess, theorize, that everybody knows they're drinking after work. Because that's what they do.
It's just something they do every day. It's
Exactly.
part of their schedule.
It's part of the whole narrative, right? Like, to be a man in this time and place, at this kind of a job, this kind of a man, you go to the bar after work with your boys, right? That's what you do. That's part of it. If there's a new guy, bring him too. But yeah, like that's how it is. And if that's the case, and I think it's fair to posit that, well then now we've said it's intentional, but like, now I'm like, it isn't. If that's what they're gonna always do anyway. You know what I mean? So again, the question is, do they choose this numbness? Do you think? You guys are saying yes. Okay.
Well, there are other options to go home and eat with.
So is that an option?
It is,
To go home and get yelled at?
but I don't think it's a fun option.
It's kind of like a rock and a hard place. That's not an option. That's not a real option. Like if I knew my options were to stay here and teach you guys, or go home and have my wife chew me out, which is weird because she's right over there. I'd stay. I'd stay. You guys would be like, hey man, class is running a little long. Be like, I know. I'm just saying, it's less of a choice. It calls this into question. And that's interesting too. Because now we're wondering what demands this emotional numbness. Part of it is they want to escape, sure. But I think another part of it is, I'll put it this way. It's possible that the very narrative they want to escape, right? To be a man, they have to work the job they work. They have to not complain about it. All that. It also says they go drinking after work to mute those feelings. So you could argue that the same stereotypes that are running them into the ground are also making them numb it. And if that's true, again, the question, like, what do they choose to do in this poem? They can't choose to walk him. I would argue there's at least a question as to whether or not they can choose to drink after work, you know? Like, what do they really choose for themselves? They didn't choose their lives. That was chosen for them by the sound of it. They got drafted, right? There's a little bit of World War II. Like, again and again and again, it seems to be, much like Little Boy, I don't know how much choice is here. So then it's like, well, then what does the choosing for them? And that's a hard question, but that's a thesis question. Does that make sense? A little bit? Somebody help me with the time, because God help it, this guy's trying to undo the updates again. 9:31? Okay, cool. So we got a half hour. Here's what I want you to try to do. I call it a lightning round, and it's just as fun as it sounds. To the best of your ability, either electronically, or if you're like me and you print stuff out, which again is super fucking fortunate. Ideally, by this point, you all have at least a poem that you're thinking of writing about. Maybe you're not sure, but you're pretty sure. Away to go hunting for one good quotation. In the way that we talked about here. You may have some already. Some of you did the homework. Some of you didn't. And I'm just like, why not? But you can go look in there if you want. And you may discover that you didn't quite nail it there. That's fine. Go look in the poem again. I'm going to give you a couple minutes. Find me one good quotation. Or quote from language. Something you can dig into. I don't care what it is, but something you can that says more than it just says literally. Take a couple minutes. We're going to talk about it. We'll start here. We'll just kind of sweep across the landscape. What poem are you looking at?
Body and soul.
Body and Soul. Okay. What line?
Um,
With your chest, please. Say it with your chest. You gotta mean it.
I did the. Where is it? And that's the story, and those are the facts, but the facts are not the truth. I think, though, as I scan the faces of these old men, now lost in the innings of the youth, I think I know what the truth of the story is.
Okay. What language specifically are you thinking about?
The repetition of truth and facts, and
Okay.
how the men are lost in the innings of their youth.
Yeah. Well. Okay. For that may or may not be two different paragraphs, though. Okay. Because, like, especially facts and truth gets repeated throughout the poem. That's almost like its own phenomenon. You know what I mean? That you would have to deal with. Innings of the youth can tie into it. Let's do that real quick. Lost, he says. That's a good verb, too. Lost in the innings of their youth. What do you guys think about that? What could we do with that? Lost in the innings of their youth, he says.
You're trying to reminisce on good times.
Yeah. That's kind of like,
They're just fully immersed.
yeah.
Some of their youth was stolen, or at least they felt like it was stolen.
Okay, well, you're skipping ahead. You got a breadcrumb, but that's good. That's good. Let's slow down a little bit. Now, we said we like this language. I agree. Specifically, because that's just a weird way to talk about it. Like, he's saying what Eli just gave us, right? The reminiscing, yes. But he could say that. He says it this way. What does it mean to be lost?
Not know your way out.
Not found.
Not know your way out, not found, gone. I lost my dog. Oh, fuck, man, I'm really sorry. Like, that's lost. It's gone. They are gone in the innings of their youth. Can't find a way out. Maybe like in the woods, you know? That's a little stronger than reminisce, right? To be lost in memories. That's something that might be worth talking about, okay? But with that, the innings of their youth. Let's think about that. Youth we get. They were young once. It was kind of great. Which, by the way, is true. Generally, things just get harder the older you get. I wake up in the morning, I'm sore. You know, stuff like that. But he says innings of their youth. What on earth? Obviously, we're talking about baseball, right? How you measure time in baseball. What does it mean to say innings of their youth, do you think? What?
Different sections of their youth, different parts of their youth.
It's a marker of time. And again, we can start with that, okay? So, I'm putting these, because these are kind of two separate points, but but now I'm going to make you say something else, right? Because again, if you ended with that, this is on its own what would be called a banal claim. It's true, it's an argument, but that's kind of it. We don't have to do a lot of work, right? What are innings? What are they associated with? Baseball. What is baseball?
America's pastime.
America's pastime, which is potentially interesting, right? We'll file that one away for a second. What is? We're sure to have another team. What else is baseball?
So sport, the really good sport.
It's a sport. It's a G word. It's a game. It's a game, right? Which becomes a sport, and it kind of does in this poem. It's a little bit of a game. It's a little bit of a sport, right? But it's a game. That's an interesting way to think about their youth. Lost in the innings of their youth. Kind of implies that their youth was what? Yeah, it was a game. How, if you guys could help me real quick, because you're closer to it than I am. How is your youth like a game?
Progress like a game, like innings.
Okay.
For instance, like the first inning, you're fresh, you're brand new, so you're like a toddler. And then as the game progresses, you get to like the ninth inning, if you're 17, 18, when you're tired.
Sounds good for you to get to it. You said fresh, and I was like, that's not going to go well.
But like at a younger age, you have more energy.
Yeah.
And as you grow older,
Yeah, okay.
you realize life is not as much of a game as you thought, because then you get more responsibilities as you go. And towards the ninth inning, you have to decide whether you want to win that game or lose that game. And so usually that's when you realize the stakes.
Yeah. Okay. For sure. Well, here again, what kinds of things, I mean, I kind of ran with what you said just a little bit, but that's where you're headed. That's what responsibilities are. What are the responsibilities of these men? Do we know?
Provide for their families.
Provide for their families, what'd you say?
We can get an idea of what they do, or like what their responsibilities are.
Yeah, I'm just like a little bit of a list. That's one though. Provide in general, right? For their families. Go to work. You could argue drink after work. You could argue that's one of their responsibilities. Because honestly, if Derek didn't show up to drink with everybody after work, people would have questions, right? Well, that kind of tells me that's something Derek's supposed to be doing. What happened, man? Like people will say it like that. You're like, I just went home. It's like, wow. Did you forget what you're supposed to, right? It's kind of, anyway. But I like the one we can run with, they're supposed to provide. First of all, how do we know they're supposed to do that?
Man of the house.
Exactly.
Literally say
And we get that all through the poem, right? But specifically in this poem, we know they're supposed to, and we know how it goes. Because why?
lay it out.
Broken Kenmores with complaining wives, little white rent houses. That implies they're not taking care of things, but that they're supposed to. Otherwise, why would we bring it up at all? Right? So that takes this conversation, lost in the innings of their youth. We start here, takes us here, that takes us here. And that gets us here, which gets us to those other lines. And now all of a sudden, I think we can make an argument for why they're lost in the innings of their youth. Why are they, do you think? In those little white rent houses, the wives complaining about broken Kenmores.
They're no longer having fun.
They're miserable.
What do you say?
They're miserable.
Oh,
They
yeah,
want to
you
go
guys
to a time where
Why?
they-
Why aren't they,
They live the same day over and over, and it's never good.
Okay, why not? What would be good for these guys where they are now? What would look like fun in that context?
They work hard. They have.
They're working appliances? Yeah.
They work hard, but they get paid.
If they could provide like they're supposed to, like they were told they could, as per, well, and
The American
the
dream.
American dream. We're talking about fucking baseball in 1950. It's the American dream.
Yeah.
How does baseball work? You practice more, and yeah, you're skilled, but you put the time in. It shows on the field. You win because there's rules that we all abide by, right? And then, like, what the fuck, man? I got through all the innings. What happened? I did what I was supposed.
Better try next time.
Well, there is no next time on your life. Yeah. Okay. So, what we've come to, we've lumped all this together, and these are notes. I just want you to understand. We did a lot of work real fast, lightning round. But this may actually end up being 2 or more paragraphs. But the argument we've arrived at is what? Something to the effect of, I'm gonna phrase it like you did. They're not having fun. Real quick, we gotta get one more sentence here. Why does that bother these guys? Why do they care? That they can't provide. Seems to eat at them in this poem, right? Why? In what context?
Then you're supposed to provide.
Okay. Okay.
If you can't provide, then you're failing not only you, but your family as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Agree.
Right? That's what we're saying. Now we want to encapsulate that as a more maybe concise argument, but again, for our purposes, that's pretty solid, and I just want to underscore for you. We got all of this from that, right? Digging into language. That's it. God help us, we may only have time for one more. I think this is what happens. This is a good problem. All right. I'll take a volunteer. Sorry, I started with you. What do you? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Lay in bed. Body
Beauty.
song. Yeah, no, body song.
Oh, okay, okay.
Laying in bed, stroking their husband's wrist tattoo and smoking. Line 13.
Okay. What about that line are you thinking of?
Well, in this poem, we talk about that they have a routine of working, drinking. I mean, same thing.
Yeah.
There's not any compassion. And if there is a point in the poem, that's where the female compassion comes in.
Yeah, like this quiet moment with their wives.
Right after the kids are in bed. So.
Yeah. Yes. Although again, I'm still gonna ask, like, in terms of language, is there anything specifically that kind of grabs you there?
Stroking their husband's wrist tattoo.
That's an interesting detail, for sure. What's that detail about? Their husband's wrist tattoo. Why does the speaker give us that?
Well, we don't know what the tattoo is. It could be
No.
a tattoo of years ago of them. Maybe the wife is thinking, remembering. Maybe that's her time.
Maybe.
Could be
What is a tattoo at all? Yeah, we can start there.
It's permanent.
Permanent, and it's a reminder of something. Sometimes it's just a really stupid night that you had, but it's a reminder, right, of a thing. On your wrist too. That's kind of an intense place to get a tattoo, right? So that implies that this is a meaningful thing, whatever it is, right? Okay, sure. And yeah, I mean, it's arguable. I mean, it does say she's specifically rubbing the wrist tattoo, so you could argue that it means something to her. Maybe it's something it's a time they shared. It's a time they both had and knew. But again, the important thing is, I suppose that time has passed, maybe, right? The other thing I would say, I think you kind of sell yourself short just a little bit. I know these poems really well. It's the only, like, lay in bed stroking your husband's wrist tattoo and smoking Chesterfields from a fresh pack until everything was okay. That okay to me
Yeah.
is big. What'd you say?
Is it like being the half number at the beginning?
Why do you say that?
Because they're drowning their sorrows in something else to.
The smoking and the laying there? Yeah, a little bit. But well, talk to me about okay. What does it mean to be okay?
Just willing to just let things happen.
Not great, and not.
Horrible.
And isn't it kind of? It says they lie there until every. He even says just, I believe. Oh no, I made that up. I'm sorry. From a fresh pack until everything was okay. Like given the syntax there, it sounds like they're moving up to that point. Like okay for them is the pinnacle. You have a good day? Yeah, it was all right. Like that's what they're aiming for. That's the best they could do, you could argue. Right? And what's interesting, I like the half numb, right? Because it recalls that a little bit, right? We talked about half numb, whether or not it was intentional. Originally we said yes, because it is. You choose to drink or you don't. But again, I try to push you guys a little bit toward, well, yes and no, right? Here, they are very intentionally trying to get to okay, trying to get to it from what seems to be below that. But again, I would ask, if that's your only option, like how much of an option is it? Like if they could choose, great, I think they would take it. But it's not there. So like, how much of this, I guess is what I'm trying to say, how much of this is them choosing to be okay versus how much of it is that's all they can do? You know what I'm saying? I feel like your hand was going up, but I could have made that up.
So I was gonna say,
Yes.
to go back to the wrist tattoo.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if anyone else has had this thought, but is it possible that he may have tried to take his life at one point and he got a tattoo to cover it up, and that's why his wife is rubbing it?
That may be a bridge too far. Only because, I mean, again, you can go a little bit into the theoretical. That's what argument is. You have to do that, okay? But for something you'd have to have something else to pin it on too. You know what I mean? Like you can have that theory, but then you have to go, oh, and this line helps me support. Without that, man, that's what one of my old professors would call a stretch. But which is good though. I mean, again, all that means is you're trying to look around the poem. You're trying to, but yeah, I would personally pump the brakes probably a little bit on that. But again, I like the idea that she's stroking it. I like the idea that this guy probably didn't run out and get the tattoo yesterday. Like this is a marker of youth too. That's when people tend to get tattoos. I know a person, actually, who has a tattoo they're embarrassed about. They got it when they turned 18. People do that. And like most things you do when you're 18, you're embarrassed about it later. That's how it works. This one just happens to be on your body forever. You know? Yeah, for sure. But again, she's remembering their youth too. Maybe this is her innings of their youth that they have together. But again, it's just okay. It's not. Whee! All right. What's behind this?
56.
Damn. All right. I'm gonna have you guys draft for not quite 10 minutes. What that drafting needs to look like. You can take the line you pulled if you want. Whatever you want. I just want you to work on a paragraph in the same way we did up here. Dig into language. I guarantee you have not done it in the way that I've asked yet. I guarantee you. Okay? So whatever you want to do for the next like 8 minutes, Just write. And then we'll go on break.